Europe's biggest airlines is in a fight for its life tonight. Air France has no CEO. Its workers are in open rebellion. And now the French government says it won't provide any kind of safety net. Labor strikes resume Monday, forcing the airline to cancel 15% of flights. It's the 14th day of strikes this year, costing Air France upwards of $400 million. Shares fell nearly 10% by the close of business Europe. And before he resigned, Air France CEO Jean-Marc Janaillac explained how dire the situation has become.
This conflict is unbearable. It weakens the company and prevents it from moving forward on the projects it needs to lead. Air France is losing customers and the first gains that it obtained through its efforts. The company's reputation is deteriorating.
This crisis comes at a time when Air France has been aggressive in trying to make a new name for itself. Last July, it took on its Middle East rivals by forming a virtual airline alliance with Delta, Virgin Atlantic, and China Eastern. Air France also entered the low-cost market last summer to compete with many of its European rivals. It launched June, which it said was an airline targeting millennial flyers. But day in, day out, Air France is still plagued by labor disputes. You may remember an HR executive who had his shirt ripped off while trying to escape protesters back in 2015. Simon Calder is in London joining us. He is the travel editor for The Independent. Simon, thank you so much for being with us. I want to pose something. Could the government's strong statement saying there won't be a bailout actually be a tactic to bring negotiations forward between the unions and the leadership at Air France?
Yes, and it was also saying, I must speculate, we are not Italy. You'll be aware that in neighbouring Italy, Alitalia has kept flying through the decades, even though it is an appallingly run airline, which loses an awful lot of money. And I think the French government was just putting a marker in. When the economics minister, Bruno Le Maire, said, we will let Air France go bust, he was really just saying, look, there isn't a bottomless pit of money, and you guys really have to sharpen up. And of course, the markets didn't like what happened with the resignation of Jean-Marc Janaillac on Friday. They didn't like the fact that the reason he had to go was because he gambled on taking a ballot about the new pay offer and lost that. And they also don't like, of course, the spike in oil prices that you've been discussing today. And so, therefore, everything's looking a bit grim. But someone's just got in touch with me. Help, I'm flying from Detroit to Paris in June. Should I cancel my flight and book with someone else? No. I mean, even though the strike is continuing, in a couple of hours from now, it will enter its second day in France. More flights cancelled today. Will be cancelled on Tuesday, about 20% of them. That's not good. It's going to cost the airline another 20 million euros, so $25 million.
How long can it sustain that, Simon? Because like you said, fuel costs are not something the airline's going to be able to control. And the French finance minister warned that if Air France doesn't take the necessary efforts to become competitive with major airlines, quote, it will disappear. So how much is there an existential threat to Air France now?
I really cannot see this dominant airline, which, of course, has a very profitable Dutch partner in the shape of KLM, which isn't involved in the dispute and is doing pretty good stuff. But look at Paris Charles de Gaulle, by far the biggest hub in continental Europe, better connected than any other airport in Europe. And the French, of course, have a lot of domination on routes to certain parts of Africa. So it's basically a pretty solid airline. Yes, they do need to shape up, but I can tell you the metric that they will be looking at with some satisfaction in Air France headquarters tonight, and that is the proportion of staff who are going on strike. Now, I've been tracking that over the weeks, and this is the 15th day of strike action in the course of several months, and it's down as low as it's been. Basically, about 15% of pilots, of cabin crew, fewer than that in terms of ground staff. And I think the management will be thinking, OK, we are going to get there eventually. But of course, every day that there's a strike, it means that business travellers, the people who bankroll the whole operation, are going to be less and less inclined to book with Air France because they've just got to get there and they don't want want to brook any uncertainty.
Simon Calder joining us from London with The Independent. Thank you so much, Simon.